So let me welcome you to Irtiqa. And with me, you have Mohammed Yahia from Cairo, and you are the editor of Nature Middle East. And
Yes,
you
that's
are
correct.
also in charge of the blog House of Wisdom, which looks at issues related to science in the Middle East.
That's true. Yes.
Can you say a few words, what is Nature Middle East and what kind of things that you do?
Okay, yes, sure. So basically the whole idea behind Nature Middle East, it's a portal from the publishers of Nature magazine, which basically focuses on science and research and scientific breakthroughs in the Arabic speaking Middle East. So it's a regional portal that we have. So the whole idea is that we think that this is an interesting region of the world right now, and we want to bring the science happening in the region to a wider audience that might be unaware of what's happening in this particular area of the world, if you say so. At the same time, what we want to do is to make it a hub for researchers in the area as well to know what's happening in the region, the latest that's going on, maybe to share their own work on the portal as well, that kind of thing.
Do you translate material in Arabic, or how does that work?
Well,
Just in,
we produce all our material in English, but
uh-huh.
then we translate it into Arabic as well. So we offer everything in English and Arabic as well. And very soon we'll also have a dedicated English and Arabic portal. So it's not on the same website anymore. There'll be two different versions of the website to tailor for the different audiences.
Okay. Well, so we'll come back to the science issues towards the end, but of course, as you mentioned, well, you are in an interesting region, and perhaps a little. Unfortunately, right now things are a bit more complicated in Egypt. So I thought, since you are sitting in Cairo, so rather than me talking about this, what is your opinion? Just in general, how are things currently in Cairo?
Well, the last 2 weeks have been an incredible roller coaster, I would say, in everything in Cairo. Um, it's not looking very well right now. I'm not very happy with where we stand right now. But I can also see that we were at a point where something had to happen. It was pretty essential. So if you go back a bit to the 30th of June, which is when this whole thing started, there was these huge calls for protests against President Morsi for various regions. So you had everyone pretty much going out asking for him to call for early presidential elections for different reasons. There were people who were not happy with the economic conditions in the country, which were going bad really fast. Others who were not happy with the constitution that was passed and how it was passed and how it undermines the right of minorities and women. There was, quite a few flaws, if I can say so myself, in the constitution. So everyone went out for their own reason. It turned out to be this incredibly huge mass protest, which it's actually hard to imagine, but it's actually bigger than the ones who went out against Mubarak 2.5 years ago. Um, so the whole call was for early presidential elections in 6 months. Because we were not happy with the performance, and because at least quite a few people felt that the current regime was actually undermining democracy rather than enforcing democracy in the way they've been handling things over the past year. But what happened is that the presidency refused that call, which is when the military intervened and gave an ultimatum of 48 hours for the presidency to either answer the calls of the protesters or they will put together a roadmap for the future. When the presidency ignored these calls, this is exactly what happened. And this is the area of contention right now. Do you call it a coup or not? Is this a military coup or not? And that's the ongoing question around the world, really. Everyone is asking that. Is it a coup or not? And I personally cannot really say. Obviously, on one side of it, it's obviously a coup because the military are very involved. They have actually removed the first freely elected president in the history of Egypt, if you would say so. But at the same time, there was an incredible mass calling from the people themselves, asking for the removal of the president, and who were scared that if he would finish his 4 years, then we would not end up in a democracy at all. We would end up in a system which is identical to the one we had before during Mubarak, except with a theological aspect to it as well. So is it a coup or not? I really don't have an answer to that. But when people ask me, I really don't have an answer. All I can say is I'm not happy with the military intervening again. This is not how I envision things. I went out in the protests on the 30th of June asking for the president to have early presidential elections, and I think that would have been the best solution to preserve the victories we've had from the 25th of January revolution 2 years ago, and at the same time where we can actually start moving in a proper direction to have a more democratic and more free society. But when these calls were unanswered and the military intervened, it was just, I'm not sure how it would have ended up elsewhere. But the way I see it, it's just probably a second phase that we just have to go through. So now there's a new reality to deal with, which is that the military is back in power in a way, and this is something we have to deal with. And I guess the calls will continue for removing the military or the army from the ruling spectrum, that is.
Right, and you were part of the protests of anti-Mubarak also. And then,
yes.
So like in 30th June, you were with sort of like anti-Morsi. So
not to sound as a hobbit, it's just that.
Well, I mean, it's a good time for protests in Egypt to a certain degree. So do you think, I mean, the army gave 48 hours, and do you think that was a sufficient time, or that was something that army was looking for an excuse? I mean, there is no question that anti-Morsi protests were huge and there was pressure on them. The question is that what follows from that? Was the military the only solution, or it could have been waited, or how do you see that? And of course, that is the point of contention, but how do you see that?
See, that's quite one of the really interesting points. I mean, when I remember what happened in Mubarak, the military did not take part in anything until 18 days after the protests started. This time, the military was very keen to interfere quite early. So just 2 days after, or 1 day actually, after the protests, they sent out this 48 ultimatum, which is kind of dubious and worrying, I would say. And my explanation for this would be that the truth is there are people who were involved in the protests against Morsi who were there, who were actually part of the previous Mubarak regime. So in a way, they were undermining his presidency, his work. And I would not deny this. This is the truth. They were involved in the protest, which is very unfortunate, because if you told me 2 years ago I would be standing in a protest with people who were pro-Mubarak a while ago, I would have not believed it possible. But it happened because everyone was pretty much discontent with how it was going, and that's pretty much what brought people together. So what brought people together was that they do not like Morsi, but for very different reasons, from the very noble, freedom-loving side to the very dubious people who just were not happy and wanted to bring back the old regime of Mubarak, really. So was that enough time? No, I don't think it was enough time. I don't think the military should have intervened so early. On one side, people would argue that the military intervened so early because they were worried there would be very severe clashes that would end up in a civil war, which is not very far-fetched, if you would say so, because you have very fervous supporters of Morsi, and you have this huge mass of really angry people who went out calling for him to step down or call for early elections. And whenever, anywhere those two came close to each other, you had clashes erupting right away. So if these would have happened on a larger scale, I don't know if it would have been controllable or not. Some people would argue that this was a way for the military to pressure Morsi into giving concessions, basically calling for the early presidential elections that people wanted. But I personally would have preferred if they would have not been involved except security-wise to make sure that the two parties do not come together to control the fighting, quell down the clashes that take place, rather than getting involved so quickly in the political move. I mean, you have no idea what it would have been like in a few more days. Maybe if we had kept that pressure. I mean, my very initial impression of going out on the 30th of June was that it will not be a one-day thing. I knew we would need a sit-in. It would be long. We might be there for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, but we will be there until Morsi actually listens to the sound of the people. This was my intention when going out. But when all this happened, I kind of stepped back and I said, I'm not really sure I want to be there right now. I don't like the military being in the picture. It was very worrying for me.
So you did step back once the military, it looked like the military was getting involved?
Yes, I did. I went on the 30th of June, but then after that ultimatum, I just stepped back. I wasn't very comfortable with being involved in this right now. It was very unclear. The point is, we have a very long, well, not a long, but I mean a very live history with military rule after Mubarak. A lot of good people died in clashes. There was a lot of brutality that I witnessed myself. I've been involved in several events that were very deadly. I was there. I saw how the military acted. It was they keep claiming they practicing self-control. It was not. It was brutal. And it was very similar to what happened a couple of days ago when they attacked pro-Morsi supporters, which was something I found very, very offensive and very distressing myself. I'm not on that camp, but I do not want to see them being treated this way, because the whole military brutality thing, it just really worries me and scares me. And this is what I think we should be fighting right now.
And so it looks like even more than before, the divisiveness between, or sort of like the differences between pro-Morsi and anti-Morsi, and of course there is a spectrum in there, but the extreme ends are now more extreme and much bigger on both sides.
That's true.
In some sense, you were talking about sort of like this fear of a civil war, for example, with Morsi, but how do you see things now that the military has cracked down on pro-Morsi supporters, and also he might, Morsi is still under arrest or house arrest or something like that, and they might try him. So, how do you see that play out? Within the local context.
Like I said, Salman, it's very unclear and very worrying. That's why I find the current situation is very distressing. The violence went down over the past 2 or 3 days, that's true, but the situation remains very unclear, very unsure, no idea how it will play out. There's obviously a large number of people who are calling for Morsi to return to power. They're not just Muslim Brotherhood supporters as people would paint them. No, there's a lot of people who went out to support them because they are opposed to the military coming back in the picture. So there are a lot of people out there in those protests right now that look pro-Morsi, who actually hate Morsi, but they don't see the military as the proper alternative.
So do you think that group of people, which is very important, which was sort of like anti-Mubarak but not necessarily Muslim Brotherhood, and then they were anti-Morsi, but do you think that substantial fraction of those groups are going to come out sort of like against the military? Do you see that developing?
They're already out there. They're already camping and supporting pro-Morsi. But the point is, I don't know how the pro-Morsi protests could end. They are calling for Morsi to come back.
Yeah.
In a way, I do not see how he can come back, because there isn't a country that he can work with anymore. All the institutes of the country have went out against him. They're all standing against him. So there isn't really something substantial that he can work with. What I would personally like to see is that, I'm very against the crackdown on Muslim Brotherhood members right now. It's scary. It doesn't make any sense, and I don't think in any liberal society this should be accepted in any way. That's why I've personally spoken out against that as well. That's why I think the two camps need to come together, and I wouldn't say accept the new reality, but work with what we have on the ground right now, which is this roadmap, which sounds good, in my opinion, but it can go any way when the military is involved, in my opinion. It can be delayed, it can be changed, anything can happen at this point. So these groups need to come together and realize that no, Morsi cannot come back. I don't see how that is possible except in an alternate universe, but I don't see how that is possible right now anymore. But we have another issue that we need to deal now, which is to pressure the military to stay out of the picture and for this roadmap to be implemented as accurately as possible.
Well, this is something actually coming from Pakistan. I mean, we've seen sort of like those negative examples of military coming in or pulling the strings behind, and that is something that it still hasn't. Pakistan still hasn't extricated itself from periodic coups that takes place, and they're always in power, and partly because military also has, as in Egypt, a lot of investments also. They own a lot of industries and things like that. So it's not simply just the power, but also economic.
Yeah, that sounds exactly like here. And that is one of the things people are scared about. If that this would set a precedent where the military can just remove any president that they don't like, which is a worrying aspect, but one that I also think the people can pressure not to have. I mean, I always say that the problem with Morsi is he completely alienated the people on the street. He had his supporters who are Muslim Brotherhood, and he worked around them being his backup, if you would say so. And in doing that, he completely alienated people. So, for example, in the runoff elections, I personally voted for Morsi because I did not want the other candidate who was basically a remnant from Mubarak's era. So I personally voted for Morsi. He made very, very important promises to the liberals and revolutionaries who supported him, and went back on every single one of them, which is why right now it's very hard for me and others like me who have felt betrayed by these promises to find a way to support him now. So I think that in a way this could either set one of two precedents: either that the military has the power to move a president, and that would be a horrible thing to set up. And I think it's something that the people should obviously stand up for and put the military in its right position, if you would say so. Or it can set a precedent that you cannot just alienate the people and expect to get away with it, which is something I think would be a positive development in our fledgling democracy. I mean, we still very early on. I cannot say we had a democracy that was just overturned, because we did not. The truth is we did not have proper democratic institutes. We did not have proper checks and balances. We did not have even equality was not. There were so many problems in the fabric of things. That's why I don't think this is much of a coup, as more of the next phase in this ongoing move that we're trying to go on to create the society that we actually went out against Mubarak hoping to have, which is a free democratic society where basically people are equal and where we don't have to deal with police brutality or military brutality or all that stuff that were pretty much a part of life in Egypt, if you would say so.
So one other question about this, and that is, I mean, if there are free elections, say, for example, in next year, right, according to the roadmap, do you see Muslim Brotherhood coming back, and do you see, or do you think they would have a leader, or do you know a leader, that might be pragmatic in the concerns that you have mentioned, or is it going to be the cycle that will repeat itself again?
You mean a leader from the Muslim Brotherhood, or just generally a leader?
Or do you think that if there are elections in 2014, there is a possibility that somebody other than the Muslim Brotherhood can come to power?
In the next elections, I would very sincerely hope that the Muslim Brotherhoods can come into the elections. Right. I don't see the solution being to remove them from political life. It's stupid. It will not work. We know it will not work from past examples. They are part of the community. They are part of the society. There are supporters. They represent the people, so they need to be there. I think they should be involved. Right now, they do not want to be involved because they're standing opposed to everything that's happening right now. But I would hope that down the line, they would take an active part step back, analyze the mistakes that have happened, and actually come back maybe stronger, I would hope. So yes, I would want them to be involved. I would stand against removing them from political life. Personally, I would completely stand against this. Do I see a pragmatic leader come out who can do that? The problem is that right now, on the landscape, I don't see someone who can do that. Between Mubarak era, which has undermined any potential person, they're working. Anyone who had any potential would have been undermined through the security apparatus. And the best example of that is the Baradei himself, where when he came back to Egypt, there were all kind of rumors and attacks on him to completely, pretty much a character assassination kind of thing. And then during the past 2.5 years, all these events have not really brought up someone that I would see as a leader. Rather, it has chipped away at people that I might have respected before that I don't respect as much anymore, or even like. People who people who took a liberal stance, but I don't see them applying that. It's pretty much a facade that they were putting forward.
Well, let's see how things turn up. So let me finish this bit by coming back to science, hey, something cheerful, relatively. So there were some projects that had started in Egypt, and that was there was plans for Science City. There were plans for the development of sort of like science institutions, post-Mubarak era. Where are they, and what is going on? What has its impact on those projects?
Well, like you say, there were quite a few really interesting projects that came up, really positive. The first Science City, for example, this was quite a huge thing, which was set up by Nobel laureate Ahmed Zuweil, which is pretty much under attack right now, but because it's been involved in a very long judicial battle over the campus that the government gave it. There were very interesting initiatives. There was actually an improvement in the budget of science research. The problem is with events like this, when this political strife takes place, almost always the first side effect is that science is sidelined pretty much, because it's very hard to concentrate on that. It's very hard to work on that. But these projects that were set up, they're actually still ongoing. So the Science City, it's still there. They're setting up. They're building their capacity. They should be taking students next semester in September. The first batch of students, for example, in the university they have there. The budget has not decreased. The science research budget has not decreased. Actually, in the next government, they haven't decided on the ministries yet, but there's talk of a particular science research minister who would be quite interesting to have. Who is young, who's a young person. His name is Assam Heggi. He's working with NASA now. I know Assam personally, and if he is picked for that position, I think it would be incredible. So there are little positive signs, but the problem is these things are always sidelined during events like this, which is sad. Because over the past 2.5 years, there was always something happening every 2 to 3 months, always political strife that would put these projects on hold. One good example really is Zuweil Science City of Science and Technology. You've got this incredible project, and then there's a really good university, which is Nile University, and they're both fighting over the campus. And they're two really positive buddies. I would love to have both of them. It doesn't make sense that the government would prolong this fighting over some silly campus for 2.5 years because they can't solve the solution by giving them another campus, when we pretty much have a lot of desert that you can utilize for that,
Yeah,
So,
Cairo is pretty expansive. There can be another place for that.
yeah, it can be, but you've got two really positive buddies. Nile University has been there, has been doing interesting research, and then you've got Zuweil City, which has presented this really incredible vision, and you've got Zuhail backing it with his own vision, with his own background of working in research in the Western world. It would be really interesting to bring that vision back to Egypt and set up something like that. So this is a very small example of the problems that can arrive with that. So it's quite a silly problem when you look at it. You can really have the two of them. It wouldn't really be that hard to set up two places for two really good projects. But then this has been prolonged in judiciary system for 2.5 years now.
But on the other
no
hand,
idea how it would end, actually.
But on the other hand, those are. Do you think there would be political ramifications, the changes that are taking place on Science City or on that battle, or do you think that would be simply it's not relevant, it was not political in that sense?
My personal opinion, the political situation might actually have an effect on that. Okay. Simply because, which is sad actually, if that would happen, because you might have a new government in place that would basically say, we support this particular body over this particular body, so we will support them over the other and just kick the other out. That can happen either to the Science City or to Nile University. It depends on who would come into power, who they're in contact with, that kind of thing. So, for example, during setting up this particular government, the new one, which should be announced in a couple of days, there were talks that they would offer the Science Research Ministry to Zuhail himself. That would have pretty much shifted it to one side, obviously. Right. Except I don't think they did offer it to him, or maybe they didn't accept. I don't think he's one of the names on the table right now. So this just gives the example of how politics can interfere into these events. You could get someone who's completely against the board of Zuhail City, for example, and then they would support Nile University to move back into the campus, that kind of thing.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I mean, that was really amazing insight, and it's great, to hear your opinion, especially that you are right in the middle of all of those things. And I mean, we were all watching sort of like breathlessly the anti-Mubarak protests, and I think all of these changes are a long haul. I mean, as you said, this is just another stage in it. Unfortunately, it's a little bit downside right now, but really best of luck. And Egypt is so important in the region, in the Muslim world, in the Arab world, and yeah, I mean, I think the dynamism of the young people, they sort of like the protesters, hopefully will really come up positive in the long run.
Yeah, it's like you say. I mean, it's not the best of times right now, but I'm hopeful because of, like you said, of those young people. There's still this energy there, which is interesting because I was always under the impression that this energy might have died off after the initial uprising against Mubarak. But it's interesting that they're still there. They still want to be involved. They still want to be heard, because I think it will really come down at the end to the young people. It's inevitable in a way, I think.
Great, thank you. And I should mention that you also have a Twitter account where you also give updates on what's going on over there and things like that. So thank you, Mohammed Yahia. And hey, and Ramadan Mubarak. I mean, that's going on over there.
Thank you.
All right, okay.
Thank you. All right, thanks for having me, Salman. I appreciate it.